Next slide. So here's one of the difficult ones. Disbanding for change to a different parent group. Now, whatever we're doing to benefit kids, that's the most important thing, as long as the kids are benefiting. But when we are actively talking about voluntarily closing down a nonprofit in the state of California, there's a process that needs to be followed. And we've broken it down here for you on this slide, starting with phase 1. Your executive board is going to discuss closing down the PTA. Now, this may originate within your executive board. It may originate outside of your executive board, and then the executive board takes it under consideration. It's a motion that needs to be made and seconded. It's a business item that is open for debate. And most of the motions you will see in this process require a 2/3 majority to pass. And that's quite simply because we are attempting to undo something that's already been done. So we need what is in essence a supermajority to make it happen. So once this executive board decision is made that yes, we're going to try to move forward with closing down the PTA, then we start the clock ticking, because there are a host of things under California Nonprofit Corporations Code that need to happen in terms of making sure that we notify our organizations, both our supervisory organizations and our membership, that everyone is able to make an informed vote regarding what's going to happen. So when this happens, if it's being done properly, the district and council should be aware that this is being considered and that this is being discussed. And I'm going to tell you, just like I tell you in other ways, it's in your bylaws. So that should be part of the process, because the district or council officers are entitled to actually attend so that they can ensure that everyone is informed. We all know there's a lot of misinformation that floats around about what PTA is or what PTA does or what we don't do. And I'm not going to get into those urban legends now, but we've all heard them. But when we have situations like this, the district or council come in with facts. This is what it is. This is what will happen. This is what needs to happen. There's also a lot of facts. There's also a lot of misinformation about what a PTO means. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying either one is bad or that either one has more misinformation about it, but it's making sure that everyone is able to make an informed vote regarding moving forward, because we owe that to our membership, the right to make an informed vote. And that's why when that motion is made to begin the process to disband the PTA, discussion is allowed. But again, it's also a 2/3 vote is required to begin moving on to the next phase. As part of this process in our first association meeting where we're talking about dissolving, that means that we have to actually look at what our organization is, what it holds, and what it has, so that it can be distributed appropriately. Because once this organization goes away, it doesn't own anything. Those officers can't come back and talk about it. They can't act on behalf of it. They can't access the money. It's all done. So you have to decide so you have to help them decide as a district leader what they're going to be doing with the remainder of funds. You need to make sure they're aware of any final bills, such as tax filings, because we're going to talk about that in a bit. All of the things that need to be done to shut down this organization properly. And not just because we tell them they have to do it, but because they need to do that because they are a nonprofit organization operating in the state of California. Next slide. So then phase 3, and you'll notice this takes 2 association meetings to do. That's why you have 60 days notice in your bylaws for what this process looks like in terms of when the council and district get notified. That final meeting is where the final information is presented. Why are we disbanding the PTA? What's being done with our assets? Our distribution of funds, our final payment of bills. They take that time to make sure there are no outstanding debts. All the vendors have been paid, everything has been done, all their obligations have been met. The final distribution of funds and final bills, that's where that's discussed and voted on. And that last piece of business, And again, I'm going to come back to that funds and payment of final bills, tax filings. That motion that's made to officially disband, that is the last piece that occurs. And again, it needs a 2/3 majority to pass. Every vote needs a 2/3 majority to pass in this process. Once that vote happens, that PTA now ceases to exist. It is no longer a PTA. So the district needs to do that change of status disbanding form, but no one can act on behalf of that PTA. It's all done. Next slide. And sometimes we find things out after the fact where we don't always go along. We aren't there for the ride, for the process, as it were. We find out after the fact that we decided to go PTO. Okay, well, we still have an obligation to make sure that things were done as close to properly as we can determine. So we need to ask, can you please send us minutes of when the vote was conducted? Because that's PTA property. You want to make sure that the change of status form is sent to Cindy Barton, because we want to make sure that that PTA stops being on our insurance and that their totem is turned off and they don't have access to anything that they shouldn't be because they're no longer a PTA. You want to make sure that the school and the school district know that they're no longer a PTA. We can't help you anymore. And you want to let them know that everything that belongs to the PTA, the records, the assets, all of that needs to be turned over to the district, including a final bank statement that says that there was no money in the PTA account. Because again, they cannot continue using that same bank account they used for PTA. They can't continue using the same EIN number they used for PTA. They can't continue using anything that belonged to the PTA for whatever new organization they are, whether they're a PTO, PTG, doesn't matter. If they're not a PTA and they've changed to something else, then that PTA needs to be done. So if they have remaining funds, they need to be provided to the district. The final financial review needs to be conducted. And hopefully they filed their final tax returns. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But we need to verify that so that we can make sure that the organization is dissolved appropriately. Because if they want to come back, it's way less work for us if we get it all done as soon as we know they go away than when we're trying to bring them back. We can still talk to people. We can still get that information. We can still get things handled and get things dissolved appropriately much faster, much easier if we know when it happens versus years later. Next slide. So what you see on your screen right now is a sample letter to send to your school district superintendent and the principal for a disbanded PTA unit. You can send this by email. You can send this by hard copy. You know how communication is going to be received by your districts that you serve best. If you want to be very, very thorough, send one by mail and send it by email as well, just to be on the safe side to make sure everyone is clear. Because it is, as we all know, communication can sometimes be difficult and not everyone sees their emails. But then if you send it both ways, you are doing your due diligence to make sure that you notified them that this PTA is no longer there. Next slide. This is another sample letter to send to the previous officers to let them know, here's what you need to do. Here's what needs to happen now. And this helps ensure that you've done your due diligence to make sure that everyone is informed every step of the way. Sometimes you won't get everything you're asking for, but at least you are doing the due diligence to complete your obligations as part of this process. We all do the best that we can. Next slide. And this is really important to note. When they are voting to disband, that effective date is immediate. It's right then. The vote cannot be taken that we're going to disband at some later date in the future. California Corporations Code has a significant number of very nuanced regulations regarding dissolving or dissolution of a nonprofit that is membership based. When they take that vote, they're done being a PTA. So everything needs to be surrendered. They stop using the PTA name. They stop using the EIN, the FTB number, the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers number. It's no longer called the Charitable Trust number. It's the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers. But we're getting used to it. It's like that transition from auditor to financial reviewer. We're still working on it. But that moment that vote happens, that's it. They're done. So it's really important that everyone is really informed every step of the way so that they can make that informed vote. And I know I've said that a bunch of times as we've gone through this, but I cannot stress how important that is, because the last thing you want is a group of 5 people coming up to you and saying, hey, I was in that meeting and we're now not a PTA and I don't like that. They voted and I didn't understand what was happening. This is a big deal. So in terms of over communicating, in terms of reaching out over and over and over again, in terms of being firm with, no, we need to make sure people are informed. I'm not saying show up at their house and tell them they need to hold a meeting, but reaching out and making sure that the procedures are followed appropriately so that everyone is protected and everyone is informed. That's really important. The money isn't ours. We take care of it for the kids. We want to make sure that they benefit. Next slide.
All right. I think we're moving on to Donna at this point.